I bought a quiet piece of land to escape my high-stress job, but the local HOA Karen decided it was hers. She didn't just complain. She forged my signature on a deed and tried to have me thrown off my own property. She even brought her own enforcement to do it. What she didn't know is that my high-stress job is as the FBI's lead investigator for the Financial Crimes Unit. She didn't just commit a crime. She hand-delivered a career-defining case right to my doorstep. Stick around to hear how her little land grab turned into a federal indictment that dismantled her entire corrupt HOA. There comes a point in every man's life when he craves silence. Not the absence of noise, but a deep, profound quiet that settles into your bones. For me, that point came after 15 years in a world that was anything but quiet. My name is Mark, and my job involves navigating labyrinths of deceit, untangling webs of sophisticated lies, and looking into the eyes of people who believe they are smart enough to get away with anything. It's a high-stakes, high-stress world of federal law enforcement, and the silence is the only antidote. That's why I bought the 20 acres. It wasn't a ranch, not a farm, just a perfect, untouched slice of nature bordering. A state forest on one side and a sleepy, upscale housing development on the other. It had whispering pines, a crystal-clear creek that gurgled over smooth stones, and a small, grassy clearing where I planned to one day build a small, modest cabin. It was my sanctuary, my escape. The deed was in my name, the title was clear, and the property lines were surveyed and marked. I owned it, free and clear. It was, I thought, the one place on earth where I could be completely and utterly left alone. That I was wrong. That my first introduction to the local homeowners association, or HOA, came in the form of a woman who seemed to be powered by pure, undiluted indignation. Her name was Brenda. I met her one Saturday morning while I was walking the perimeter of my land, just enjoying the morning air. She was standing on the edge of the manicured road of the housing development, her arms crossed so tightly. It looked like she was trying to keep her own organs from escaping. She wore a tennis visor, blindingly white sneakers, and a polo shirt with a small, embroidered logo I couldn't quite make out. In her hand, she held a clipboard. A clipboard is never a good sign. "You're him, then," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. It wasn't a question that I offered a polite, neighborly smile. "I'm Mark. I just bought this land here." She sniffed, a sound of profound disapproval. "We know. The HOA has been monitoring this parcel. You've put up signs." I glanced at the simple, professionally made no trespassing signs I'd posted along my property line. "Yes, just standard practice to ensure privacy." "Privacy?" she scoffed, as if the very word was an insult. "This land abuts the community of Whispering Pines. The aesthetic harmony of our community is paramount. Those signs are an eyesore. They're aggressive." I blinked, trying to process the logic. "They're standard property signs, Brenda. They're placed on my land, facing my land. My name is Ms. Albright," she corrected, her eyes narrowing. "And I am the president of the Whispering Pines HOA. The viewscape from our walking trails is now polluted by your warnings. Furthermore, that creek," she pointed a rigid finger towards my property, "is considered a community amenity. We've received reports you plan to fence it off." I took a slow, deep breath, the kind I'd learned to take before interviewing. A hostile witness. "Ms. Albright, with all due respect, the creek is entirely on my property. The survey markers are 100 feet from your community's land. My ownership is not in question. I have no plans for a fence right now, but I have every right to install one." Her face turned a shade of pink that clashed horribly with her polo shirt. "We'll see about that," she muttered, making a furious note on her clipboard. "The original charter for Whispering Pines has provisions. You'll be hearing from our legal counsel." She then turned on her heel and marched away, her back as stiff as a board. I just stood there, the peaceful silence of my land now tinged with a faint, ridiculous static. I've dealt with organized crime bosses, with millionaire fraudsters, with people who would sell their own mother for a profit. And yet, the sheer, unadulterated entitlement of this woman was something to behold. I shook my head, assuming it was just a case of a petty tyrant with nothing better to do. A minor annoyance. Over the next few weeks, the annoyance grew. I received 3 separate letters from the HOA's legal counsel, a firm that a quick search revealed was run out. of a strip mall and specialized in traffic tickets. The letters were filled with nonsensical jargon about historical community access, riparian viewscape easements, and aesthetic noncompliance. Each one was a masterpiece of empty threats and bloated language. I filed them away in a folder labeled Brenda's Folly and continued with my life that I thought she'd eventually run out of steam. I underestimated her. The world of petty tyrants has its own brand of relentless, irrational ambition. Brenda wasn't just looking for a fight. She was looking for a conquest. The real escalation came about a month later. It arrived in a certified, mail envelope. Inside was a letter, far more official this time, from the county records office. It was a notification of a recently filed deed transfer. My heart didn't sink, it went cold. In my line of work, you learn to recognize the scent of a serious crime. This was it. Attached to the notification was a copy of the document itself. A quitclaim deed, dated 2 weeks prior, transferring ownership of my 20 acres from Mark Renshaw to the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. I looked at the signature line. It was a clumsy, almost pathetic attempt to replicate my signature. The loops were too round. The pressure was all wrong on the downstrokes. The R in my last name was hesitant, shaky. It was a forgery, and it wasn't even a good one. To a layman, it might pass a cursory glance. To me, a man who has spent over a decade analyzing forged documents in multi-million-dollar fraud cases, it was like a child's crayon drawing hanging. In the Louvre, I sat there for a long moment, the document in my hand. The anger I felt was not hot and explosive. It was a cold, sharp, and focused fury. This woman, in her boundless arrogance, had just crossed a line. She hadn't just sent a nasty letter. She had committed a felony. Multiple felonies, in fact. Forgery, filing a false document with a government agency. Depending on how she did it, likely mail fraud and wire fraud 2.m. My first instinct, the civilian instinct, was to drive over to her house, slam the forged deed on her door, and threaten her with every law in the book. But my professional training took over immediately. You never show your hand. You never let the suspect know they're being watched. You let them get comfortable in their lie. You let them build the cage, and then you simply lock the door. Brenda had no idea who I was. To her, I was just some quiet guy who bought a plot of land. She had no idea she was trying to steal property from a man whose entire career was dedicated to putting people like her in prison. She had just handed me, on a silver platter, the most open and shut case of my career. And it was personal that I didn't contact a lawyer. I didn't call Brenda. I did what I do best. I opened an investigation. The first thing I did was put my own property under surveillance. Discreetly, of course. I installed several high-resolution, motion-activated trail cameras, the kind hunters use. They were hidden in the foliage, pointed at the main access points from the Whispering Pines development. I also placed a small, audio-capable recording device inside a birdhouse I mounted on a tree near the clearing. Everything was legal, as it was all on my own land. Then, I did a deep dive on Brenda Albright and the Whispering Pines HOA. It was depressingly predictable. The HOA was her personal fiefdom. The board members were her cronies. Public records showed a history of frivolous lawsuits against residents for minor infractions. Financial statements, which I was able to access as a matter of public record, were a mess. Funds were unaccounted for. Large payments were made to vague consulting firms, one of which was registered to Brenda's brother-in-law. This wasn't just about my land. This was a pattern of corruption. My little case was getting bigger. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. The letters stopped. I knew what was coming. She was letting the fraudulent paperwork settle. She was waiting for the system to process her crime, believing that once it was in the county records, it was fact. She was building her confidence, preparing for her final move. The day came, as I knew it would. It was another Saturday morning. I was on my property, ostensibly clearing some brush near the creek, but really, I was just waiting. My phone, which was set to receive alerts from my cameras, buzzed in my pocket. A motion alert from camera 3, the one pointed at the main path from her neighborhood. I looked up, and there she was. Brenda was marching onto my property like a conquering general. And she wasn't alone. Flanking her were 2 large, burly men. They were dressed in cheap, ill-fitting black uniforms with a patch on the shoulder that I later saw was the same crest from her polo shirt. HOA enforcement, it read. It was so absurd it would have been laughable if it weren't so serious. I leaned on my rake and waited for them to approach. Renshaw. Brenda barked, stopping about 20 feet away. She held up a piece of paper, a printout of the forged deed. I believe you are trespassing. I kept my expression neutral. Brenda, we've been over this. This is my land. Not anymore, she said with a triumphant smirk. According to this legally filed and executed deed, this property now belongs to the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. These gentlemen, she gestured to the two goons, who were now trying to look intimidating, are here to escort you off our land. If you resist, we will have you removed for trespassing. This was the moment. The recordings were active. I needed her to confirm everything. I took a step forward. Let me be clear. You are holding a document that claims I signed my land over to you. That's right, she said, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. Your signature is right there. The county clerk accepted it. It's ironclad. And these men are here to enforce this document. They are bonded agents of the HOA, she lied. I'd already checked. They were day laborers from a temp agency. I nodded slowly, letting the silence hang in the air. I see. Well, in that case, I think I need to make a phone call. Brenda laughed. A short, ugly sound. Go ahead. Call the sheriff. We'll show him the deed and have him arrest you. I think I will, I said, and I pulled out my phone. But I didn't dial 911. I dialed the direct line to the local sheriff's office, a number I had on speed dial. Sheriff Thompson, please. It's Mark Renshaw. Brenda's smirk faltered for just a second. The use of the sheriff's name seemed to surprise her. A deputy answered and told me the sheriff was out, but he could help that I spoke calmly and clearly, knowing Brenda and her. Goons were listening to every word, and my own devices were recording it all. Yes, my name is Mark Renshaw. I'm at my property at 1500 Forest Edge Road. I'm reporting an active attempt at an illegal eviction based on a forged legal document. The primary subject is a woman named Brenda Albright. She is accompanied by two men impersonating licensed security officers. I'd appreciate if you could send a unit. Brenda was now looking genuinely confused. My calm demeanor was not what she expected. She expected yelling, threats, a scene. Instead, I was acting like a man filling out paperwork. You're the one who's going to be arrested, she shrieked, her composure finally cracking. We have the deed. We'll let the deputies sort it out, I said, ending the call that we waited. For about 10 minutes, an awkward silence hung over the clearing, broken only by the gurgling of the creek. Brenda kept shooting venomous looks at me, whispering to her enforcement officers. I just leaned against a tree, waiting patiently. Finally, the crunch of gravel announced the arrival of a patrol car. A single deputy, a young man named Miller, got out. He looked from me to Brenda's little crew, his expression one of weary resignation. He was used to dealing with HOA disputes. Brenda immediately descended on him. Thank goodness you're here, officer. This man is trespassing on HOA property. I have the deed right here. She shoved the paper into his hand. Deputy Miller looked at the deed, then at me. Sir, is this your signature? Before I could answer, I saw them. Two sleek, black, government-issue sedans were pulling up quietly behind the patrol car. They were unmarked, but they screamed federal agent to anyone who knew what to look for. Two men in suits got out of the first car, and a woman in a suit got out of the second. My team. I told them to be on standby. I turned my full attention back to Deputy Miller. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my wallet, but I didn't show him my driver's license. I flipped it open to my credentials. No, Deputy, it is not my signature, I said, my voice dropping into the calm, authoritative tone I used at work. My name is Special Agent Mark Renshaw, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I'm the lead investigator for the Financial Crimes and Forgery Task Force for this district. And Ms. Albright here has just attempted to defraud a federal officer and has walked herself and her accomplices directly into an active federal investigation. The color drained from Deputy Miller's face. He looked from my badge to the approaching suits, his eyes wide. He looked at the forged deed in his hand as if it were a live snake. Brenda just stared, her mouth hanging open. The word FBI seemed to short-circuit her entire brain. She looked from me, to my credentials, to the agents. Now flanking me, one of my agents, a sharp professional named Harris, addressed the deputy. Deputy Miller, Agent Renshaw is the complainant and lead on this case. We'll be taking custody of the suspects." Brenda finally found her voice. It was a weak, sputtering squeak. You can't be. You're just some guy." I gave her a cold, thin smile. "That's what they all think, Brenda. You committed a felony. You forged a legal document. You filed it with a government office. You used the mail to send threatening letters in furtherance of your crime. And you hired these two men to intimidate me, which adds another charge to the list. You weren't just trying to steal some land. You were trying to steal it from the one person in this state you absolutely should not have crossed." Harris turned to Brenda. "Ms. Albright, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, mail fraud, and forgery of a federal officer's signature. You have the right to remain silent." Brenda's face crumpled. The tough, tyrannical HOA president vanished, replaced by a terrified, bewildered woman who had just realized the game was real, and she had lost spectacularly. Her two enforcement goons put their hands up immediately, wanting no part of an argument with the FBI. My agents cuffed a sobbing Brenda. I walked over to Deputy Miller. "Sorry to drop that on you, Deputy. The scope of this got bigger than a local matter." He just shook his head, still looking stunned. "No, sir. Not at all. I've dealt with her before. Never thought it would end like this, though. It always ends like this when people think the rules don't apply to them," I said. The aftermath was exactly as you'd expect. The investigation into the Whispering Pines HOA finances, prompted by my initial deep dive, uncovered years of embezzlement and fraud, all orchestrated by Brenda and her board. She hadn't just stolen from me. She'd been stealing from her own neighbors for years. My case was just the thread that unraveled the whole rotten tapestry. Brenda, faced with a mountain of evidence and the testimony of her former cronies, who all turned on her to save themselves, took a plea deal. She's currently serving a multi-year sentence in a federal correctional facility. The HOA was dissolved by a court order, and a receiver was appointed to manage the community's assets honestly. Her two enforcers were charged with conspiracy and got off with probation after testifying against her. And me? I finally have my silence. The land is peaceful again. The only sounds are the whispering pines and the gurgling of the creek. Sometimes, I sit in the clearing where I'll one day build my cabin, and I think about Brenda. I think about how a person's arrogance can be a self-destruct sequence just waiting for a trigger. She thought she was a queen in her tiny kingdom, making up her own laws. She just never imagined that one of her quiet, unassuming neighbors was the one who enforced the real ones. She wanted my land. In the end, she lost her freedom. A very poor trade, I'd say. A very, very poor trade.